Hello graduate teachers and beginning teachers. My name is Holly and I'm an early years trained teacher here at TeachStarter. I've been involved in helping create some of the guided reading resources on the website, as well as some of the literacy rotation resources. I've written a few blogs about my experiences in the early years classroom, and I'm here just to share some of those hints and tips for things that worked for me in the early years classroom setting. Now, you've possibly heard about guided reading and literacy rotations at university. It's all well and good to find out what guided reading is and how literacy rotations may work in a classroom. However, the realities of this running in your classroom is slightly different. There's lots of things that you need to consider and lots of things that you might need to plan. So I'm hoping these hints and tips will help you get off to a good start. The first thing you'll need to consider, and this is my first tip, is how you're going to level your students into small groups. Now, don't be too hard on yourself. There's no way that you're going to get 4 equal groups in your classroom with them all reading at the same level. Work out at your school what diagnostic tools they use to level students based on their reading abilities and also their comprehension skills. Some schools might use a PM benchmarking diagnostic tool to work out what level each student is reading at, and also to determine how they're comprehending the text. I use this along with a bit of phonemic awareness as well, so it's important to use different diagnostic tools that are going to help you get the best combination of groups for your literacy rotations. Don't worry though, you can easily move students between groups. So that's the first thing you need to do, is work out how you're going to group your students. The second thing to consider is, what is it going to look like in your classroom? Now, I've only had experience in an early years classroom, so my hints and tips are very much based on an early years setting. In my class, I had a guided reading rotation, I had a comprehension rotation, I also had a phonics activity, and then I'd usually have a writing station. So this might have been journal writing or handwriting or whatever I determined my students needed extra help with. So this is just how I would run it in my classroom. Your class might be slightly different depending on what they might need help with. I would run my literacy rotations with 20-minute to half an hour sessions. So it was usually 2 mornings a week. And the students would go to their different rotations first up, spend half an hour there, then they'd come back to the carpet and we'd rotate through to the next station. So that would happen 2 mornings a week, which meant that I was able to listen to every student in my class read to me. The other thing that you will need to consider is, what visuals are you going to use in your classroom to help your students understand and know where they'll be going. On our website, we have a number of templates that you can use, that you can display in your class, that will help you and your students know what's happening on a particular morning. This is one example, which is our spinner. So there's different templates. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one has 6 groups. Obviously, you might not have 6 groups. You might only have 4 groups like I would often have. But it's a fantastic visual to help your students know what they'll be doing on what day. So you'll have the activities around the outside, and then it simply will get moved between the sessions. An important point to note for me, what worked for me, is that the reading with the teacher, or the guided reading, whatever text was read at that time, the comprehension activity was straight after, and it was always to do with the text that we read in the guided reading session. Don't make too much work for yourself. Make the comprehension activity based on the book the students have just read. It makes it much easier for them and also much easier for you when you're planning. We also have these fantastic grouping posters. This is just one example. We have plenty of them, different colours, different topics. This one's just the sea animal one that I've picked because it's the most popular on our website. So I think there's 10 different groups if you're going to have 10 groups, but it's a fantastic way for the students. They can even pick what their group name is, and the students love that. They can vote on that. So here's an example of one already set up. So this would be up on my wall with my spinner. This is the Turtles group. The names are always stuck on there with blue tack or Velcro, so that you can easily change the students' names depending on how they're going throughout the term or throughout the year. Another tip that really worked in my classroom was the student at the top, so Michelle here, would be the group leader. So for that week, she would be responsible for coming to the front and getting the activity, the worksheets, the books that were required for the guided reading, the comprehension task for her group, and taking it back to her group as well. The students loved this and it gave them a sense of ownership. So Michelle would be the group leader for that week, and then the next week I'd move the names down. I'd move Nash to the top, and Nash would be the team leader for that day or for that week. If you check out all of these posters available on our website, you just search grouping posters, and there are so many different variations that you could use in your classroom to suit your classroom decor or to suit the theme that you might be doing in your class for that particular term. My next tip is, how are you going to organise the resources and the books for that week's rotations? So to make you feel more organised, have a think about how you'll sort out the different groups and the activities that they will need for that week. There are so many different things that you can use. Of course, you've got the Elizabeth Richards tubs. So you could get 4 or 5 or 6 of these in the different colours, and it makes it really obvious to the students if they're in the green group or if they're in the green turtle group, they will go to the green box, the team leader will go to the green box and get the activity out that they will need for that session. You don't have to get those tubs, you can also just get a coloured folder. These are available on our website as well, which are tray labels which match the grouping poster. So you can put all of the activities and the books in that folder as well. Just some simple ways to make sure that you're organised in the classroom, and it will make your students feel more organised as well because they'll know what to expect. My next tip is use your teacher aid time and parent help, especially in the early years classroom. I found that the more adults that I had in the classroom, the more on task the students were going to be. At the beginning of the year, I would wait for my timetable to come through from admin, which showed me where my teacher aid time was. I'd always pray that I'd get a morning hour block, at least 1 hour block in the week, and that's when my literacy rotations would happen. My teacher aid would always be on the comprehension station. So I would have myself at the Reading with the Teacher station or the guided reading station, and then I'd have the teacher aid at the comprehension station, remembering that that comprehension task always related to the book that I had just read. That makes it a little bit tricky, especially when you have day 1, rotation 1, what group goes to the comprehension station if they haven't done any guided reading. The way I got around that was that my higher ability group would always go to that comprehension station first, and they would do a comprehension activity that might not be related to the book we'd read during guided reading. It was the best way that I could manage that, and they were often at a higher ability, so they found it easier to read a text and do the comprehension in the time that was allocated to them. Parent helpers in the early years classroom were always super helpful for me. It's not for everyone, but if you feel comfortable having a parent helper come into your classroom, it's definitely going to help you make the transition into literacy rotations much easier. I'd always have my parent helper on the phonics activity, and it was usually a fun hands-on game, or it might be using sidewalk chalk outside on the cement just outside the classroom, where the students would be consolidating their knowledge of phonics or a sound that they've already learnt. So I would never introduce a new sound, a new digraph. At that time, it was always consolidating a sound or a grapheme that the students had already learnt the previous week. So that made it easier for the parent because majority of the time the students understood what phonics activity they were going to be doing, and they also had some knowledge of that sound. So that made it a little bit easier as well. The fourth activity that was always writing, so journal writing or handwriting, was always an independent task. So that's sort of an idea of how I managed in an early years setting to have small group work happening in the classroom, which can be tricky. My next tip is to make sure that in your Reading with Teacher station or your guided reading, whatever you may call it at your school, pick purposeful text that the students are going to be engaged with. Our What's Buzzing magazines are a fantastic example of this. So within our magazine, We've got a variety of text types. We've got some fantastic illustrations that the students will really engage with. And best of all, we've got matching task cards that go with each of the articles in the magazine. Now, you might be wondering how you are going to do levelled group reading. So we have one available for each year level. So that's possibly a way that you could have some varying reading levels for the students that will be coming to you during your reading with the teacher. Just on the task cards that are available, there are language task cards, a comprehension task card there ready to go. So this is for the robot chant, which is a poem that's in one of our magazines, and there's actually comprehension activity that you could use there. So that's already planned for you. There's also a writing task card. So if you decide not to do journal writing, the students could even do the writing task that linked to that article as well. So this is making it really easy for you to plan. There's thinking task cards, so that's incorporating remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating and creating. There's also reading strategy task card, which is perfect for you to use during the guided reading as well. So check out our What's Buzzing magazines because they've got the texts, which are super engaging and your students will love. And there's also pretty much your literacy rotations planned for you as well. So definitely check that out to make it easier for yourself. Another thing that I found really, really helpful in the early years classroom was to create a reading folder for each individual student. So this made it really helpful to monitor and keep on top of individual reading goals with each of your students. So they knew when they came to guided reading with me that they would bring their individual reading folder. Whatever you put in here depends on the level they're at and what's going to help them during that reading session. So for example, this one you might put, so these reading goals are available on our website as well. So you might stick right at the top what that individual student's reading goal is, and it makes it really easy for you to keep on top of what they're working on. Obviously you have some sort of idea, but in a class of 28 students, it's hard to keep on top of all of it. So this also helps you, and it helps your student keep at the front of their mind what their reading goal is. You might then, in here, these perhaps are reading goals they've already accomplished. You might also include in there a reading strategies bookmark if that's something that's going to help that particular student during reading with the teacher. Other fun things you can include in there are these. So simple, it's just a big paddle pop stick with a googly eye at the top, and that can really help students with tracking while they're reading. It's also a great way to encourage fluency, so instead of going along the text with each word, and I guess I used to say, are you reading bumpy? Moving it along smoothly so the students are really learning about fluency and how to read fluently. So that's individual reading folders that hopefully will help you and the students that come to you during the reading session. Another thing that I learned along the way is when you're doing the reading with the small group or the guided reading, and you start writing different reading strategies that students might be showing or things that you notice they need extra assistance with, I'd write it on a post-it note. That post-it note would sometimes, well, actually often go missing in my huge paperwork mountain on my desk. So that's why I helped develop and create this guided reading folder. So this is a whole pack on our website. It's obviously got the really pretty cover, which we like to have, and the binder cover as well, but it's also got some fantastic templates that will help you keep on top of where your groups are at during a guided reading session. We've got a reading comprehension individual profile. So if you're really wanting to get an idea of how your students are comprehending a text, here's a fantastic checklist. It's got first observed, second observed, third observed, because it's often important that the students are demonstrating these skills on a regular basis. So that's an individual comprehension profile. We've also got a reading strategies individual profile. So what reading strategies are the students in your group showing? That can often get tricky to do individual checking. So we've also got a guided reading group's comprehension strategy tracker. So you put each of the students' names down the side, and then it's just a simple tick and flick for comprehension strategies that you are observing during that guided reading time. So there's plenty of other templates in there, so check that out. It's the guided reading folder and it's available on our website as well. Another thing to consider is to not get stuck in the round robin routine or habit. This is something that I admittedly did at the start of my teaching career because I thought that was easy. Round robin is going around the table and each student would read a page in the circle. What I noticed happening was students who were perhaps third in were working out what page they were going to have to read, and they were trying to decode that while the other students were reading. So they weren't listening to the text, so there's no way that they would be comprehending the text. And it also created a bit of anxiety in some of the lower ability students. One way I got around that is we would start off by doing reading in our head. I would then go around and I would tap one of the students on the shoulder and they would know to start reading where they were up to quietly to me. This meant that they felt comfortable because they were just reading to me, and it meant that they were really reading the whole text so that I could check for comprehension, but I could also check for what reading strategies they were using. So that was just one way of not doing the round robin experience for the students, which is a little bit scary for them. My last tip is that routine is everything. You can be as organised as you possibly could be, but really don't expect the first session to go as well as you would hope. The students in your class might not have done literacy rotations in the way that you want to do it in your class. They also may never have done small group work like you're expecting them to do in your classroom. So I would spend a couple of weeks going through the motions of literacy rotations in your classroom, how it will look, what your behaviour expectations are of the students, and think about different things that might happen, like a student wanting to go to the toilet. If you're in the middle of doing some really in-depth reading with a student, what could you teach your students to do rather than interrupting you? So you could do a simple, they could come up to you and do the T sign, and they would know they'd need to get a responsible friend to go to the toilet with them. So that's just one example of things that might happen. So once you spend a couple of weeks going through the motions of how literacy rotations will look in your class, then you can start doing more in-depth activities that are at the ability levels of each of the groups. So those first few weeks, you're just picking some activities and fun things that they could do because you're just teaching them about the routine and how literacy rotations will work in your classroom. I hope these hints and tips have been helpful. There's certainly a plethora of information, templates, resources on our website. You just need to search guided reading. My blogs will come up. All of the resources that I've mentioned here will come up, as well as a podcast episode where Bron from our podcast For the Love of Teaching interviews me as well. So there's certainly lots of information out there. Best of luck, and I hope it all goes well. Thank you.